Welcome to part 2 of our series on Trump 2.0's foreign policy vision. In this episode, we dive into how Trump's approach redefines alliances versus great power moves, examines regional flashpoints and evolving security dynamics, and explores the transformative role of technology and decoupling. Stay with us as we break down these pivotal shifts shaping U.S. leadership and global order. A recurring theme is that Trump sees alliances as means rather than ends. He may use alliance commitments as bargaining chips in great power dealings. For example, Trump might trade concessions to Russia or China in exchange for something, much like a business deal. There have been reports suggesting he has even pondered whether the U.S. could reduce support to one rival, such as choosing between Ukraine and Russia, in order to gain help against the other, perhaps hoping that Russia curtails its ties with China. While this remains speculative, Trump's emphasis on deal-making raises such possibilities. What is clear is that values-based coalitions, such as NATO for democracy or a united front to uphold international law, are less important to him than arrangements based solely on national interests. He is willing to break with allies if he believes the U.S. can secure a better deal bilaterally with an adversary. This transactional mindset is fundamentally at odds with the traditional U.S. role of rallying a united coalition to check powers like China and Russia. Beyond the great power arena, a second Trump term would reverberate across regional conflicts and security issues. In the Middle East, Trump is poised to double down on a hard-nosed and interest-driven approach. He aligns closely with Israel and Sunni Arab states while showing hostility toward Iran. One should expect a return to maximum pressure on Iran, with the reimposition of crushing sanctions and possibly even the green lighting or assistance of Israeli strikes on Iranian nuclear targets. Trump's team has already warned Tehran that any attack on U.S. interests would be met with massive retaliation. Trump once stated that he would blow Iran's largest cities to smithereens if Iran threatened a U.S. life. Unlike the multilateral diplomacy of the Obama administration, exemplified by the Iran nuclear deal, or the cautious balancing approach of the Biden administration, Trump would likely adopt a far more confrontational stance or attempt to force a better deal on Iran quickly. Intriguingly, Trump also indicated that he does not seek regime change in Iran, and even said that he would like to see Iran succeed if it abandons its nuclear ambitions. He claims he could strike a new bargain within 1 week after the election. This suggests a mix of saber-rattling and deal-making. He would threaten Iran harshly, but would also be willing to negotiate a grand bargain if Iran capitulates on key issues. Meanwhile, U.S. relations with Israel and Arab allies would grow even tighter. During his first term, Trump witnessed the Abraham Accords, which normalized relations between Israel and some Gulf states. In a second term, he might push for Saudi-Israel normalization, an effort he nearly brokered via Jared Kushner. His administration would almost certainly grant Israel free rein in dealing with the Palestinians, potentially even endorsing moves like West Bank annexation. In fact, Trump's pick for U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, has not ruled out Israeli annexation of the West Bank, and far-right ministers in Israel see Trump's return as a green light. This indicates a major break from traditional U.S. support for a two-state solution. However, Trump's aversion to lengthy military entanglements would likely continue. He prides himself on avoiding new wars. For instance, he refrained from striking Iran outright even after Iranian provocations in 2019 and 2020. His mantra of "no more endless wars" resonates strongly with his base. Thus, while he would be hawkish in his posture against Iran, he might also seize opportunities for quick wins, such as a flashy summit or a prisoner exchange, rather than becoming bogged down in prolonged conflict. As one analyst noted, despite Trump's strong pro-Israel stance, even his vice presidential pick has stated that America's interests are distinct, hinting that Trump would resist being drawn into a full-scale war on Israel's behalf, such as a conflict with Iran, if he deems it detrimental to America. In the Indo-Pacific and Southeast Asia region, aside from a China-focused strategy, Trump 2.0 would try to strengthen certain regional alliances in his own way. His administration coined the term free and open Indo-Pacific and invested in the Quad, which includes Japan, Australia, and India during his first term, and these concepts would continue. However, Trump's attention to Southeast Asia's multilateral group ASEAN was minimal during his first term, as he skipped ASEAN summits, and it is likely that Trump 2.0 would neglect ASEAN once again. Instead, the U.S. would seek bilateral security ties in Southeast Asia, especially with countries like the Philippines, which is a U.S. treaty ally. This approach aligns with countering China's influence. Economically, however, Trump's hefty tariffs could hurt Southeast Asian exporters, and his withdrawal from regional trade frameworks would leave a significant gap. Some ASEAN countries might benefit in the short term. For example, Vietnam could gain manufacturing as companies pivot away from China due to tariffs. But others worry about being caught in the crossfire of a U.S.-China dispute. Trump has even threatened to scrap the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which includes several ASEAN states, calling it insufficient. Without U.S. economic engagement, Asia may perceive America as a security partner but not as an economic one, potentially driving them closer to trade pacts led by China. In the global south, as well as in Africa and Latin America, Trump's foreign policy is expected to focus much less on regions outside the core strategic theaters. His America First ethos suggests that foreign aid and development programs in Africa and Latin America would be reduced. For instance, democracy promotion and humanitarian aid, long-standing elements of U.S. post-Cold War policy, would likely be cut back. Instead, security cooperation and direct economic or military engagement would take precedence, particularly in areas where such measures serve to counter Chinese influence. In Latin America, for example, Trump has even suggested unprecedented measures against drug cartels and illegal migration. He has proposed using military force in Mexico against drug labs or cartels, for instance, by bombing fentanyl labs. Such actions would be extremely controversial and strain Mexican sovereignty as well as U.S.-Mexico relations. Nonetheless, Trump and his advisors have openly discussed these possibilities, signaling a willingness to act unilaterally if Mexico is deemed uncooperative. Similarly, Trump has planned the largest deportation effort in U.S. history, and even suggested invoking wartime powers to remove millions of migrants, moves that would reverberate throughout Central America. This Fortress America stance is very different from the more cooperative approach that previous presidents adopted with Latin America on issues like migration and drugs. It emphasizes U.S. enforcement and unilateral action, even if that comes at the cost of diplomatic fallout. In Africa, Trump showed little interest beyond counterterrorism. He infamously disparaged some African nations in vulgar terms. A Trump 2.0 agenda might further reduce U.S. engagement in Africa, except in regions where China's presence is viewed as a direct threat, such as in strategic ports or in the extraction of rare minerals. This would open space for China and Russia, both of which have been actively courting Africa and Latin America. Trump's inward focus means that U.S. influence in these regions would decline unless it directly pertains to countering Chinese influence or addressing security threats. Another key pillar of Trump's vision is to secure American dominance in critical technologies while cutting off rivals' access. Although we have touched on trade and technology issues with China, broader tech policy under Trump 2.0 deserves additional emphasis. Competition in technology, especially in areas like artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and semiconductors, would be treated as central to national security. During his first term, Trump launched initiatives to boost U.S. artificial intelligence research and development and to protect emerging technologies from Chinese theft. In a second term, we would likely see an acceleration of those efforts, including heavy investment in AI, quantum computing, and space, along with looser domestic regulations to encourage innovation and aggressive measures to prevent the transfer of technology to adversaries. For example, this might include a total ban on selling semiconductor technology to China and strong-arming allies into doing the same. A huge component of Trump's tech strategy is technological decoupling from China. We have already discussed export controls on semiconductors. Additionally, Trump has stated that he would prohibit Chinese companies from buying U.S. farmland or industries, and would further restrict Chinese students or researchers in sensitive fields. The goal is to prevent intellectual property theft and espionage, issues that Trump hammered on during his first term. As a result, we might see tighter visa screening and possibly a purge of Chinese apps or software from U.S. networks. Conversely, Trump will pressure allies in both Europe and Asia to drop Chinese technology infrastructure such as Huawei 5G networks, a campaign that began during his first term. There is expected to be a renewed push for allies to adopt U.S. or partner alternatives in telecommunications, and perhaps join the US in barring exports of high-end chips to China. One interesting factor is that allies and partners are crucial in tech competition, especially in the semiconductor sector, with key players including Taiwan, South Korea, the Netherlands, and Japan. While Trump will pressure them to align with the U.S. decoupling strategy, his abrasive approach toward allies might cause some reluctance. During his first term, many countries tried to balance U.S. pressure with their own relations with China. If Trump pushes too hard unilaterally, allies might push back. Thus, the success of Trump's tech containment strategy may vary by country. Some, like Japan and the UK, lean toward the U.S. position on Huawei, whereas others such as Germany or South Korea might be more cautious if their relations with Washington sour. Nonetheless, Trump 2.0 will likely use every available tool, including export bans, investment screens, sanctions on companies like Huawei or SMIC, and diplomatic arm twisting, to maintain America's technological edge. In summary, U.S. technological primacy would be a cornerstone of Trump's agenda. This entails boosting domestic innovation, often in partnership with industry, imposing minimal constraints on U.S. tech companies domestically, and maximizing restrictions on China and possibly Russia in obtaining advanced technologies. It is a more zero-sum and decoupled vision than the cooperative innovation environment fostered by globalization, and it reflects Trump's belief that economic security is national security. Accordingly, tariffs, export controls, and technology alliances all serve the larger goal of keeping the U.S. ahead of China and other rivals. A potential Trump 2.0 administration portends a dramatic inflection point in international politics. The U.S. would shift from being the architect and enforcer of a liberal, rules-based international order to resembling a great power that looks out primarily for itself and is increasingly skeptical of the very rules it once championed. We would likely see U.S. engagement in global institutions and cooperative problem-solving decline, as the nation retreats in favor of bilateral deals and ad hoc coalitions that align with its own interests. This could weaken organizations such as the UN, WTO, and WHO as U.S. funding and leadership diminish. Other powers might step in to fill these gaps, or the institutions themselves may simply lose effectiveness. The rules-based international order itself would be under strain if the U.S. no longer strongly upholds international law and norms in the face of aggression or human rights abuses. Alliances would also suffer, leading to a more fragmented West. NATO and other alliances would face internal divisions over defense responsibilities and doubts about U.S. commitments. Unsure of U.S. support, allies might hedge by increasing their own defense capabilities and seeking more autonomous foreign policies. Europe in particular might pursue a defense identity separate from NATO if Trump's demands and his Russia policy render the U.S. unreliable. In Asia, allies such as Japan and Australia might deepen their cooperation with each other and with regional partners as a hedge against a possible U.S. pullback. Overall, long-standing alliances would become more transactional and less rooted in shared values. Furthermore, rivals and great power spheres would become more empowered. If the U.S. pulls back from its global role, powers like China and Russia could become more assertive regionally. China may try to expand its influence in Asia and globally, filling leadership voids in trade or climate that the U.S. once held. Russia could consolidate its gains in its near abroad if U.S.-led pressure recedes. The concept of spheres of influence, in which great powers effectively have veto rights over the alignments of their neighbors, might return either implicitly or explicitly through deals that Trump makes. For example, regarding Ukraine's neutrality. This would mark a retreat from the principle of national self-determination that the U.S. has long espoused since the end of the Cold War. There would also be heightened uncertainty and instability in many areas. Trump's penchant for unpredictability could itself become a source of global risk. Allies and adversaries alike might miscalculate in such an environment. For instance, adversaries might test U.S. red lines, uncertain of how Trump will respond. He could react with sudden force or alternatively with sudden accommodation. Regional conflicts might suffer from less steady U.S. deterrence, potentially inviting provocations. Conversely, Trump's aversion to prolonged wars could lead to a reduction in some military involvements, whether for better or worse. The international community would have to adjust to a U.S. whose policies might shift abruptly with Trump's instincts and whose commitments are seen as conditional. Supporters of Trump's approach argue that it will restore respect for American power by ending what they call freeloading and by focusing on core national interests. They see Trump's foreign policy as tempered by realism. neither isolationist nor imperial, but selectively engaged. Indeed, Trump's team claims that he is battle-tested and will bring a sharper edge to dealing with foes such as China, Iran, and even in negotiating with Russia. In their view, U.S. strength will be measured not by global consensus or institution building, but by tangible outcomes. Allies paying more, adversaries yielding under pressure, and American prosperity boosted by better trade deals and increased energy abundance. Critics, however, fear that Trump 2.0 could spell the death of the world America made, meaning a collapse of the liberal order that has arguably maintained relative peace and stability. They warn that abandoning long-standing commitments and norms might invite aggression, as authoritarian powers see an opening, and that short-term transactional gains could undermine long-term U.S. influence. For example, pressuring Ukraine to concede could damage U.S. credibility and encourage China to press its claims over Taiwan. Similarly, alienating key allies might isolate the U.S. in future crises. Domestic U.S. politics also play a role. Trump's focus on nationalist and sometimes divisive policies at home could spill over and limit his foreign policy bandwidth, or alienate partners who disagree with his views. All told, a Trump 2.0 administration would be a stress test for the international system. The U.S. would shift from being a driver of multilateral cooperation to a far more self-interested actor, increasingly skeptical of global norms and commitments. America First would likely mean a more inward-looking U.S. in some respects, but also a U.S. willing to act unilaterally when provoked. The coming years could witness a more multipolar world order, with U.S. allies stepping up in unprecedented ways and rivals testing just how far a retrenched U.S. will allow them to go. As one foreign policy scholar put it, Europe is now staring at the beginning of a new post-American age. And that sentiment may be shared in other regions if Trump's vision becomes reality. The international community would have to navigate a profound power adjustment as the U.S. redefines its global role in line with Trump's distinctive view of American greatness. Thank you for watching Part 2 of our deep dive into Trump 2.0's strategy. We've explored the balance between alliances and great power maneuvers, the tension at regional flashpoints, and the new frontier of technology and decoupling. Join us in our next episode as we continue to analyze the long-term implications of these changes on U.S. leadership and the international stage.